The Christmas Eve when everything changed started with my stepmother throwing mashed potatoes at my face during dinner. My father slammed his fist on the table, screaming about respect and gratitude. 20 minutes later, I found myself locked outside in -10-degree weather, watching through the frosted window as my half-siblings tore open presents I had bought them with my last paycheck. The snow burned against my skin, my breath forming desperate clouds in the frigid air. That's when the black limousine appeared. I should have known something was wrong the moment I walked into my father's house that evening. Janet, my stepmother, stood in the doorway, wearing an apron that read, "World's Best Mom," while glaring at the modest gift bags I carried. 8 years of marriage to my father had given her plenty of practice at making me feel unwelcome in what used to be my childhood home. "Floyd, you're late," she announced, though I was actually 15 minutes early. Her blonde hair was pulled back in that severe bun she favored when she wanted to look authoritative. "We've already started eating." The dining room table sparkled with Janet's finest china, the set she only brought out when she wanted to prove something. My father, Marcus, sat at the head of the table cutting into a prime rib that probably cost more than I made in a week at the warehouse. My half-siblings, 10-year-old Brady and 12-year-old Stella, barely looked up from their phones when I entered. "Sorry," I said, setting the gift bags on the side table. Traffic was heavier than usual. Janet's eyes immediately fixed on my presence. "Oh, Floyd, you wrapped these yourself, didn't you?" Her tone carried that familiar mixture of pity and disdain. "The paper looks so homemade." I had spent my lunch break at the dollar store choosing the cheeriest wrapping paper I could afford. Each gift represented hours of overtime money I desperately needed for my apartment rent. But these were my siblings, and Christmas was supposed to be about family. "I thought they'd like what's inside more than the packaging," I replied, taking my seat at the far end of the table. The chair wobbled slightly, the same one that had been broken for 3 years. Somehow, it was always my designated spot. Marcus finally acknowledged my presence with a grunt. At 52, my father had grown soft around the middle, his once athletic build surrendering to years of desk work and Janet's cooking. "You could have at least put some effort into it, son." Presentation matters. The word "son" always felt forced coming from his mouth these days, like he was reading from a script he'd forgotten how to believe. Brady reached across the table for more dinner rolls, knocking over his milk glass in the process. The white liquid spread across Janet's perfect tablecloth, but she just laughed and ruffled his hair. "Oh, Brady, you silly goose. Let Mommy clean that up." If I had spilled that milk, the lecture about respect and responsibility would have lasted 20 minutes. I watched Janet fuss over Brady, while Stella showed her the new nail art she'd done that afternoon. The conversation flowed around me like I was invisible, which had become the norm over the years. "I was thinking," I said, during a lull in the chatter, "maybe I could visit Mom's grave tomorrow. It's been a while, and Christmas was always her favorite holiday." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Janet's smile disappeared, replaced by the expression she wore when Brady tracked mud through her clean kitchen. My father's fork stopped, halfway to his mouth. "Floyd." Janet said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "We've talked about this. You need to stop living in the past. That woman has been gone for 10 years. This is your family now." My mother hadn't been that woman. Her name was Catherine, and she'd been the kindest person I'd ever known. She'd died when I was 15, leaving me alone with a father who seemed to blame me for surviving when she didn't. Within 2 years, Marcus had married Janet and started a new family, one that apparently had no room for memories of his first wife. "Her name was Catherine," I said quietly, "and she was my mother." Janet's face flushed red. "I'm so tired of you throwing the past in our faces every time you come here. We've given you a home, included you in our family traditions, and all you do is sulk and complain. Maybe if you showed some gratitude, instead of worshiping a ghost, you'd understand what real family looks like." The words hit like physical blows. I'd never thrown anything in anyone's face. I worked 60-hour weeks at the warehouse, lived in a studio apartment, with a broken heater, and spent most of my paycheck on Christmas gifts for kids who barely acknowledged my existence. But asking to visit my mother's grave was somehow an attack on their happiness. I wasn't complaining, I said, keeping my voice calm. I just wanted to pay my respects. She raised me for 15 years. I think she deserves to be remembered. That's when Marcus exploded. His fist crashed down on the table, sending dishes rattling and wine sloshing in glasses. Brady and Stella jumped, but they quickly returned to their phones, clearly accustomed to their father's outbursts. Enough, Marcus roared. Janet is right. You come into our home, eat our food, and all you can talk about is the past. Do you have any idea how hard your stepmother works to make this house a home? How much money we spend including you in our holidays? And this is the thanks we get. I stared at him in shock. Including me in their holidays, I brought the gifts. I helped pay for the prime rib sitting on his plate by contributing to their family fund every month, money I could barely spare. Janet had never cooked a meal for me that wasn't preceded by a lecture about gratitude. Dad, I never asked you to include me. I just wanted to remember Mom on Christmas. Don't call her Mom in this house, Janet screamed, jumping to her feet. I'm tired of competing with a dead woman. You're 25 years old, Floyd. It's time to grow up and appreciate what you have, instead of mourning what you lost. Before I could respond, she grabbed the bowl of mashed potatoes and hurled it at my face. The ceramic dish shattered against my cheek, hot potatoes and gravy covering my work shirt. Brady and Stella looked up briefly, more annoyed by the disruption than concerned about the violence. Janet! Marcus shouted, but he was looking at the mess on his floor, not the blood trickling down my face from where the bowl had cut me. No, Marcus. I won't apologize. I'm done tiptoeing around his feelings. If Floyd wants to live in the past, he can do it somewhere else. Marcus stood up slowly, his decision already made. I could see it in his eyes, the same look he'd given me the day he told me I wasn't welcome at his wedding to Janet. The look that said I was a burden he'd finally decided to shed. Floyd, I think you should leave, he said, his voice eerily calm. You've upset my wife and disrupted our family dinner. We were having a perfectly nice evening until you started with your negativity. I touched my cheek, my fingers coming away bloody. You're throwing me out because I mentioned my mother? I'm throwing you out because you disrespected my wife and ruined Christmas dinner. Maybe a little time outside will help you think about your attitude. Marcus grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the front door. I didn't resist, too stunned by how quickly everything had escalated. Janet followed behind us, muttering about ungrateful children and family loyalty. Dad, wait, I said as he opened the door. The December wind hit my face like an ice storm carrying snow that felt like tiny needles against my skin. My coat is inside, and my keys. You should have thought about that before you decided to ruin our evening, Marcus replied. He shoved me onto the front porch and slammed the door behind me. I heard the deadbolt turn, then the chain lock sliding into place. Through the front window, I could see Marcus returning to the dining room, stepping carefully around the broken ceramic and scattered food. Janet was already cleaning up, her movements sharp and angry. The cold hit me like a freight train. My work shirt and jeans offered no protection against the -10-degree temperature, and the snow was falling harder now, coating my hair and shoulders in white powder. I tried the doorbell, then knocked, but no one came. I walked around to the back door, hoping they'd forgotten to lock it, but Janet had been thorough. Every window was latched tight, every door secured. I was trapped outside in weather that could kill me, watching my father's family return to their Christmas celebration like nothing had happened. Through the dining room window, I saw Brady examining one of my gift bags, pulling out the gaming headset I'd bought him. He held it up for his parents to see, and Janet nodded approvingly. Stella was already unwrapping her present art supply set I'd researched for weeks to make sure it was exactly what she wanted. They were opening my gifts while I froze outside their house. The irony wasn't lost on me, but it wasn't funny. My teeth were already chattering, and I could feel the cold seeping through my clothes, settling into my bones. That's when I saw it through the window. Janet was laughing at something Brady had said, her hand gesturing animatedly as she spoke. The light caught her ring finger, and my heart stopped. She was wearing my mother's wedding ring, the thin gold band with the tiny diamond, the one my father claimed had been lost in the chaos after my mother's death. The one I'd asked about a dozen times over the years, hoping to keep it as a memento. Janet was wearing it like it belonged to her, like my mother's memory was just another thing she could claim and remake. I pressed my face against the glass, my breath fogging the window as I stared at the ring. 10 years. For 10 years, my father had lied to me about losing the most precious reminder of my mother. He'd given it to Janet, like my mother had never existed, like their marriage had never mattered. The cold was making my muscles cramp, but I couldn't look away. Inside, my family was warm and happy, surrounded by the gifts I'd bought them, wearing the jewelry my mother had treasured. Outside, I was dying by degrees, finally understanding just how completely I'd been erased from their lives. The numbness started in my fingers and toes, creeping inward like ice water flowing through my veins. I'd been outside for 45 minutes, and my body was beginning to shut down its defenses against the cold. My work boots provided some insulation, but snow was seeping through the worn seams, soaking my socks and freezing my feet. I tried jumping in place to generate heat, but the effort left me more exhausted than warm. My breath came out in thick, white clouds that dissipated quickly in the frigid air. The snow was falling harder now, accumulating on the ground and coating everything in a deceptive beauty that masked its deadly cold. Through the dining room window, I watched my father carve second helpings of prime rib, while Brady and Stella examined their new presents. The gaming headset I'd bought Brady was already around his neck, and he was showing Stella something on the screen of his tablet. They looked genuinely happy with the gifts, which somehow made everything worse. I'd worked double shifts for 3 weeks to afford those presents. 60-hour weeks in a freezing warehouse loading trucks and organizing inventory while my supervisor screamed about quotas and efficiency. Every dollar had been carefully budgeted, every purchase planned to maximize their happiness. But I was invisible to them, now a ghost, watching life happen through glass. The neighbors' houses were dark, their owners either asleep or gathered around their own family celebrations. The Johnsons next door had left for Florida 3 days ago, and the Parkinsons across the street were visiting their daughter in Seattle. I was alone on a street full of empty houses with nowhere to go and no way to get there. I tried calling for help, but my phone was inside with my coat and keys. Even if I had it, who would I call? I had no close friends, no girlfriend, no extended family that I knew of. My father had always told me our family was small, that we had to rely on each other because no one else would help us. Another lie in a lifetime of lies. My work shirt was soaked through now, the cotton fabric offering less protection than paper against the wind. Ice was forming in my hair, and my ears burned with cold, despite being tucked under my collar. I could feel my thought processes, slowing my reactions, becoming sluggish. Hypothermia was setting in. Inside, Janet had brought out dessert, an elaborate chocolate cake, decorated with candy canes and holly. She was laughing at something Marcus had said, her face bright with joy. The same woman who'd thrown a bowl at my head an hour ago was now the picture of domestic bliss, serving cake to her children while wearing my dead mother's ring. Brady got the first slice, a corner piece with extra frosting roses. Stella clapped her hands when she saw her portion, which included a sugar cookie shaped like a Christmas tree. They were having the perfect family moment, the kind I'd dreamed about being part of for 10 years. I pressed my face against the window again, my cheek going numb against the cold glass. Inside, Brady was showing off his new gaming system, the one I'd secretly hoped to play with him someday. We'd never had a real conversation, but I'd imagined teaching him strategies for his favorite games, maybe bonding over shared interests. Stella was arranging her new art supplies on the table, organizing the colored pencils by shade. She had my mother's hands' long fingers that moved with artistic grace. I'd bought her the premium set, with extra colors, hoping she'd create something beautiful. Maybe something she'd even show me someday. But they weren't thinking about me at all. I was already forgotten, erased from their Christmas as completely as if I'd never existed. The cold was making me philosophical, stripping away pretenses, and forcing me to confront the truth. I'd spent 10 years trying to earn love from people who saw me as an obligation, at best an obstacle at worst. My legs were shaking now, my muscles spasming as they tried to generate heat. I needed to find shelter, or call for help, but every option required getting inside or reaching my phone. I was trapped in a perfect storm of circumstances, each problem preventing me from solving the others. That's when I heard the engine. At first I thought it was a snowplow, or maybe a late delivery truck, but the sound was too smooth, too refined for municipal equipment. I turned toward the street, squinting through the falling snow to identify the approaching vehicle. A black limousine materialized from the white darkness, its headlights cutting through the storm like golden knives. The car was massive, longer than any vehicle that belonged in our middle-class neighborhood. Its windows were tinted so dark, they reflected the streetlights like mirrors, giving no hint of who rode inside. The limousine slowed as it approached our house, its engine purring with expensive precision. I wiped snow from my eyes, certain I was hallucinating from the cold. Limousines didn't just appear in suburban neighborhoods on Christmas Eve. They belonged to politicians and celebrities, people who lived in worlds far removed from warehouse workers and broken families. But the car was real, and it was stopping directly in front of my father's house. The engine went silent, and for a moment the only sound was wind whistling through bare tree branches and snow pattering against pavement. Then the driver's door opened, and a man in a black suit stepped out. He was tall and broad-shouldered, moving with the confidence of someone accustomed to command. Despite the weather, his appearance was immaculate, from his polished shoes to his perfectly knotted tie. The driver walked around to the passenger side of the limousine, his movements deliberate and professional. He opened the rear door with practiced precision, then stepped back and waited. An elderly woman emerged from the car's interior, like something from a fairy tale. She was small but dignified, her silver hair styled in an elegant updo that defied the wind and snow. Her coat was clearly expensive, a tailored masterpiece of charcoal wool that probably cost more than I made in a year. Diamonds glittered at her throat, and ears catching the light from the street lamps. But it was her face that stopped my heart. Even across the distance, even through the snow and darkness, I recognized those features. The sharp cheekbones, the determined jawline, the green eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. I'd seen that face in photographs in my father's old albums before Janet had made him pack them away. It was my grandmother Eleanor, my father's mother, the woman who had supposedly died 3 years ago of a heart attack while traveling in Europe. The woman my father had mourned publicly, while refusing to let me attend her funeral because I was too emotional to handle the stress. She was standing 20 feet away from me, very much alive, surveying the house, with an expression of growing confusion and concern. Her driver stood beside her, alert and protective, like a bodyguard disguised as a chauffeur. Eleanor's eyes swept the front yard, taking in the snow-covered lawn and the warm lights spilling from the windows. Then her gaze found me, pressed against the glass like a frozen gargoyle, and her entire demeanor changed. "Dear God," she whispered, her voice carrying clearly in the still air. "What on earth?" She approached the window where I stood, her movements swift despite her age. Up close, she was even more striking, her features sharp with intelligence and barely contained anger. She pressed her hand against the glass from the outside, mirroring my position, her green eyes wide with shock. "Floyd?" she said, and my name sounded like a question and an accusation at the same time. "Floyd, what are you doing out here? Where's your coat?" I tried to answer, but my jaw was too numb to form words properly. All I could manage was a weak gesture toward the locked door and a shivering exhale that fogged the glass between us. Eleanor stepped back, her expression shifting from confusion to horror to something much more dangerous. She turned toward the house, taking in the scene through the dining room window. Marcus and Janet laughing over dessert, Brady and Stella playing with their new toys. The picture of domestic happiness. "Jackson!" she called to her driver, her voice sharp with command. "Get a blanket from the car, now!" The man she'd called Jackson moved with military efficiency, returning seconds later with a thick cashmere throw that he wrapped around my shoulders. The fabric was impossibly soft and warm, heated from the car's interior. I pulled it tight around my body, finally able to stop some of the heat loss that was killing me by degrees. "Ma'am," Jackson said quietly, "should I call the authorities?" Eleanor was staring at the house with an expression I'd never seen before, a mixture of rage and calculation that would have terrified me if it had been directed at me instead of my family. She reached into her purse and pulled out her phone, her fingers steady despite the cold. "Not yet, Jackson. First, I want to understand exactly what's happened here, and then—" She paused, looking at me with eyes that blazed with protective fury. "Then we're going to have a very serious conversation with my son." She touched my face with her gloved hand, her expression softening slightly. "Floyd, honey, how long have you been out here?" "About an hour," I managed to whisper through chattering teeth. "Maybe longer." Eleanor's jaw tightened. She looked back at the house where Marcus was now opening a bottle of wine, celebrating his perfect Christmas with his perfect family. When she spoke again, her voice was quiet and controlled, which somehow made it more frightening than if she'd been screaming. "Jackson, call Dr. Webb. Tell her we have a hypothermia case and need her at the penthouse immediately." She wrapped her arm around my shoulders, supporting my weight as my legs threatened to give out. "We're taking Floyd somewhere warm, and then we're going to get some answers." As Jackson helped me toward the limousine, I caught one last glimpse through the dining room window. Brady was modeling his new gaming headset for his parents, while Stella showed off a drawing she'd made with her new supplies. They looked like a magazine advertisement for perfect family Christmas celebrations. None of them had even looked outside to see where I'd gone. The interior of Eleanor's limousine was like entering another world. Heated leather seats surrounded a polished wood table, where crystal glasses caught the light from discreet LED fixtures. The warmth hit my frozen skin like a physical embrace, so intense it was almost painful as feeling began returning to my extremities. Eleanor settled beside me, her movements graceful, despite her obvious anger. Jackson closed the door behind us, sealing out the wind and snow, then took his position in the driver's seat, behind a partition of smoky glass. The car's engine purred to life, but we didn't move immediately. "Floyd." Eleanor said, her voice gentler now that we were alone. "I need you to tell me exactly what happened tonight. Start from the beginning." I pulled the cashmere blanket tighter around my shoulders, savoring the warmth that was slowly penetrating my frozen muscles. "I went to Christmas dinner, like I do every year. I brought presents for Brady and Stella, and I mentioned wanting to visit Mom's grave tomorrow." Eleanor's expression darkened. "Your mother's grave. And how did Marcus respond to that?" "He didn't. Janet did. She threw food at me and said I needed to stop living in the past. Then Dad threw me outside and locked the door." "For mentioning your mother." Eleanor's voice was flat dangerous. "For disrespecting Janet and ruining their family dinner." I touched my cheek where the bull had cut me the wound, now throbbing as warmth returned to my face. "But that's not the worst part." Eleanor leaned forward, her green eyes intense. "What else? Janet was wearing Mom's wedding ring, the one Dad said was lost years ago." For a moment, Eleanor was completely silent. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. "He gave Catherine's ring to that woman. You remember, Mom?" Eleanor's laugh was bitter. "Remember her, Floyd. Your mother was the best thing that ever happened to my son. She was kind, intelligent, and she loved you more than her own life. When she died, I thought Marcus would at least honor her memory, especially for your sake." She reached into her purse and pulled out her phone, scrolling through what appeared to be a long list of contacts. "I've been trying to respect your wishes for 3 years, Floyd, even though it broke my heart to stay away from my only grandchild. My wishes—" I stared at her in confusion. "What wishes? I thought you were dead." Eleanor's phone slipped from her hand, clattering onto the table between us. "What did you say?" "Dad told me you died 3 years ago. A heart attack in Europe. He said you were traveling alone, and by the time they found you, It was too late for a funeral. The color drained from Eleanor's face. She looked suddenly fragile her age, showing for the first time since I'd seen her emerge from the car. Floyd, I've been alive and well for the past 3 years. Living in the penthouse downtown, running my company, and sending money for your college education every month. College money! My voice cracked. What college money? Eleanor reached for her purse with shaking hands, pulling out a leather portfolio. She opened it to reveal bank statements, canceled checks, and correspondence printed on expensive letterhead. $2,000 a month, she said, showing me check after check made out in my name. Deposited into an education account Marcus set up for you. I've been funding your future since you graduated high school, Floyd. You should have over $180,000 saved by now. I stared at the checks, each one bearing my name in elegant script. The amounts were staggering more money than I'd ever imagined having access to. But I'd never seen a single dollar of it. Marcus told me you were too proud to accept help. Eleanor continued, her voice growing stronger with anger. He said you specifically asked him to keep me away because you blamed me for not preventing your mother's death. He made me promise not to contact you directly because it would only cause you pain. That's not true. I was barely whispering now, the enormity of my father's deception settling over me like a suffocating blanket. I never said any of those things. I always wanted to know you. Eleanor's hands were shaking as she flipped through more documents. Every month I'd call Marcus to check on you. He'd tell me how well you were doing in college, how proud you were to be independent, how you'd specifically asked him not to share your contact information because you needed space to grieve. I never went to college. The words felt like admissions of failure. I work in a warehouse. I load trucks and move inventory. I barely make enough to pay rent on a studio apartment. A warehouse. Eleanor looked like I'd slapped her. But Marcus showed me your transcripts, your dean's list certificates. He's been sending me updates about your academic progress for years. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through her messages, showing me screenshots of texts from my father. There were dozens of them, each one describing my fictional college achievements in detail. According to Marcus, I was a business major with a 3.8 GPA, involved in student government and volunteer work. Look at this one, Eleanor said, her voice hollow. From last month. Floyd made honor roll again. He's thinking about graduate school but wants to pay his own way. Still doesn't want direct contact, but he appreciates knowing you're proud of him. I read the message twice, unable to process the elaborate fantasy my father had constructed. He hadn't just stolen my grandmother's money. He'd invented an entire alternate version of my life to justify the theft. He's been cashing the checks, I said, understanding flooding through me like ice water. He's been taking the money and lying to both of us. Eleanor nodded grimly. It appears so, but the lies go even deeper than that, Floyd. She pulled out another folder, this one thick, with what looked like legal documents and investigative reports. About 6 months ago, something started bothering me about Marcus's stories. They were too perfect, too detailed. So I hired a private investigator to check on you discreetly. You had me investigated. I had to know if you were really as happy and successful as Marcus claimed. If you were, I would have respected your wishes and stayed away. But if you weren't, she trailed off, opening the folder to reveal photographs and documents that made my stomach drop. The first photograph showed me leaving my apartment building dressed in my warehouse uniform. I looked exhausted and thin, nothing like the successful college student Eleanor had been led to believe I was. The next showed me at work, loading boxes onto a truck in the freezing rain. The investigator found where you really live, where you really work, Eleanor said quietly. He discovered that you'd never been enrolled in any college, never had access to the education fund I'd been contributing to. Marcus has been stealing from you for years, Floyd. But that wasn't all. The folder contained bank statements showing multiple accounts in my name that I'd never opened, credit card applications I'd never signed, loan documents bearing my signature, but funding purchases I'd never made. He's been using your identity for financial fraud. Eleanor explained, her voice growing harder with each revelation. Credit cards, personal loans, even a second mortgage on his house. All in your name, all destroying your credit rating while padding his bank account. I stared at the documents, barely able to comprehend the scope of my father's betrayal. He hadn't just stolen my inheritance. He'd stolen my entire financial future, my identity, my relationship with my grandmother. He'd made me complicit in crimes I didn't even know were being committed. There's more, Eleanor said gently, preparing me for another blow. The investigator discovered something about your mother's death that you need to know. She pulled out a manila envelope, marked with an attorney's seal. Inside were insurance documents, police reports, and legal correspondence dating back 10 years. Floyd, your mother didn't die in a random accident. She was killed by a drunk driver named Robert Walsh, who happened to be Marcus's business partner at the time. My vision blurred as I tried to process this information. My mother's death had never made sense to me. She'd been the safest driver I knew, always careful, always responsible. The police had told us it was just one of those tragic accidents that happen to good people. Walsh was driving home from a business dinner with Marcus when he ran a red light and hit your mother's car. Eleanor continued. He was 3 times over the legal limit. Marcus was supposed to be in that car with him, but he'd left early. Why didn't Dad tell me any of this? Eleanor's expression was grim. Because Marcus received a substantial settlement from Walsh's insurance company. $2.5 million in wrongful death benefits. Money that should have been held in trust for you as Catherine's heir. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. My father hadn't just been stealing from my grandmother and destroying my credit. He'd been living off my mother's death money while keeping me in poverty, making me believe I was a burden on his family when he'd actually profited from my loss. He's been using your mother's death settlement to fund his lifestyle for 10 years, Eleanor said quietly. The house, the car's Janet's jewelry, the children's private school tuition. All of it paid for with money that belonged to you. I sat back in the leather seat, overwhelmed by the magnitude of my father's betrayal. Every kind gesture from his family, every gift they'd given me, every Christmas dinner I'd felt grateful to attend, had been funded with money stolen from my mother's memory and my own future. Jackson. Eleanor called to her driver, her voice taking on a businesslike tone. Take us to the penthouse and call David Hoffman. Tell him we need an emergency meeting tonight regardless of the holiday. Yes, ma'am. Jackson replied, his voice professional despite the unusual circumstances. As the limousine pulled away from my father's house, I took one last look at the warm windows where my half-siblings were still enjoying their Christmas celebration. They had no idea their entire lifestyle was built on theft and fraud. In a way, they were victims too, though they'd never see it that way. Where are we going? I asked Eleanor as we drove through the snowy streets. To my home, she replied, her hand resting protectively on my shoulder. And then, we're going to start getting your life back. Eleanor's penthouse occupied the top 3 floors of the tallest building in our city, a gleaming tower of glass and steel that I'd admired from a distance but never imagined entering. The private elevator opened directly into her living space, revealing an apartment that redefined my understanding of luxury. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of the city, spread out below its lights, twinkling like earthbound stars through the falling snow. The furnishings were elegant, without being ostentatious, each piece clearly chosen for both beauty and comfort. Original paintings adorned the walls, and fresh flowers filled crystal vases, despite the late hour and holiday timing. Dr. Webb should be here within the hour, Eleanor said, guiding me to a plush sofa near a fireplace, where flames danced behind glass doors. In the meantime, let's get you properly warmed up. Jackson appeared with a thermal blanket and a cup of hot chocolate that tasted like melted heaven. The warmth spread through my chest and down into my stomach, chasing away the last remnants of the cold that had nearly killed me. For the first time in hours, I felt truly safe. Floyd, Eleanor said, settling into the chair across from me. I need to show you something else. Something that might be difficult to hear, but you deserve to know the truth about your family. She opened her phone and scrolled to a contact list that seemed to go on forever. Names I didn't recognize, numbers with international prefixes, entries marked with corporate logos and government seals. Your father told you our family was small, didn't he? That it was just him and now his new wife and children. I nodded, accepting another cup of hot chocolate from Jackson. He always said we didn't have any other relatives, that it was just us against the world. Eleanor's smile was sad and knowing. Floyd, our family is enormous. I have 2 siblings, your grandfather had 3 brothers, and you have cousins spread across 6 states and 4 countries. Marcus has been lying to you about that too. She showed me photographs on her phone, family reunions. I'd never attended holiday celebrations. I'd never been invited to graduations and weddings, and birthday parties filled with relatives I'd never met. This is your Uncle William, my younger brother. He's a federal judge in California. She swiped to the next photo. And this is your Aunt Patricia, my sister. She's a pediatric surgeon in Boston. The faces looking back at me shared my features, my mother's coloring, my grandmother's determined expression. These were my people, my blood relatives, and I'd been denied them my entire life. They ask about you constantly, Eleanor continued. Every family gathering, every phone call, every holiday. How is Floyd doing? When can we meet him? Why won't Marcus bring him to visit? I've been making excuses for years, telling them you were busy with school or work or just needed space to grieve. They wanted to meet me, wanted Floyd. They're desperate to know you. Patricia has 3 children around your age who've been begging to connect with their cousin. William's daughter, Sarah, is starting medical school next year. She's been hoping you might want to visit California and see her campus. More photographs, young people who looked like variations of myself, gathered around dinner tables and posed in front of Christmas trees. Cousins I'd never met, but who apparently thought of me as family despite my absence from their lives. But Marcus always had an excuse. Eleanor said, her voice growing bitter. You were too busy, too shy, too overwhelmed by grief. He said you specifically didn't want to meet extended family because it reminded you too much of your mother. Another lie in an endless chain of deception. My father hadn't just stolen my money and my future. He'd stolen my family, my connections, my entire support system. He'd isolated me so completely that when he finally decided to discard me, I'd have nowhere else to turn. There's something else, Eleanor said, pulling out a tablet and opening what appeared to be a complex legal document. Something about your inheritance that Marcus has been hiding from you. The document was a will, thick with legal language that hurt my head to read. But certain phrases jumped out at me: primary beneficiary, controlling interest, board of directors. Floyd, when I die, you inherit 60% of my company. Not the money from the company, but the company itself. You become the majority shareholder and CEO of Hartwell Medical Technologies. I stared at her, unable to process what she was saying. Your company. Eleanor's smile was proud and a little sad. I started it 30 years ago with a loan and a dream. We manufacture medical devices that save lives, heart monitors, surgical instruments, emergency equipment used in hospitals around the world. We employ over 12,000 people and generate nearly $1 billion in revenue annually. The numbers were so large, they felt abstract, like statistics from a news report, rather than information about my own life. But Eleanor was showing me financial statements that proved every word: profit margins, employee statistics, growth projections that painted the picture of a thriving enterprise. Marcus knows about this inheritance, she continued. I told him years ago when you graduated high school. I wanted him to understand that your future was secure, that you'd never have to worry about money or stability. But he told me you cut us off financially, that you blamed him for Mom's death and wanted nothing to do with our family. Another lie. The truth is, I've been preparing you to inherit this responsibility your entire life. The college fund wasn't just about education. It was about giving you the tools to lead a major corporation someday. Eleanor showed me more documents, business plans written with my future in mind, training programs designed to prepare me for executive responsibility investment strategies, built around the assumption that I'd be taking control within the next decade. I've been waiting for you to finish your education and gain some life experience before we started working together, she said. I thought you were learning business management in college, developing the skills you'd need to run the company ethically and effectively. Instead, I'd been loading trucks and living paycheck to paycheck, while my father planned to have me declared incompetent. The irony was devastating. I was the heir to a medical technology empire, but I couldn't afford to see a doctor when I got sick. A soft chime announced Dr. Webb's arrival. She was a small, efficient woman with kind eyes and gentle hands, who examined me with the thoroughness of someone accustomed to treating serious injuries. After checking my temperature, blood pressure, and cognitive responses, she declared me fortunate to have avoided serious hypothermia. A few more hours in that weather could have been fatal, Dr. Webb said, packing up her medical bag. As it is, you'll need to stay warm and hydrated for the next 24 hours. No strenuous activity, and call me if you experience any confusion or difficulty breathing. As Dr. Webb left, Eleanor received a phone call that made her expression shift from concern to grim satisfaction. She spoke in low, urgent tones for several minutes, before hanging up and turning back to me. That was David Hoffman, my attorney. He's been working through the night, and what he's discovered is even worse than we thought. She opened her laptop and showed me spreadsheets that detailed my father's financial crimes with devastating precision. The scope was staggering: dozens of fraudulent accounts, hundreds of thousands of dollars in stolen funds, credit applications dating back years. Marcus hasn't just been stealing from you and lying to me, Eleanor explained. He's been running sophisticated financial scams for over a decade. Identity theft, credit fraud, embezzlement, tax evasion. The IRS has been looking for patterns like this for years. But the most chilling discovery was yet to come. Eleanor showed me legal documents that Marcus had filed just 3 months ago, papers I'd never seen, but that bore forged signatures in my name. He's been trying to have you declared mentally incompetent, Eleanor said quietly. The plan was to gain legal guardianship over you and any inheritance you might receive. These documents claim you're unable to manage your own affairs due to depression and grief over your mother's death. I stared at the paperwork, recognizing the psychological profile Marcus had been building for years. Every time he'd told family friends I was struggling, every occasion he described me as unable to cope. Every instance of painting me as damaged and dependent had been preparation for this legal theft. If this had succeeded, Marcus would have controlled your inheritance from me indefinitely. Eleanor continued. He could have committed you to a mental health facility, managed your finances, and legally stolen everything while appearing to be a caring father, protecting his troubled son. The plan was diabolic in its completeness. Marcus hadn't just wanted to steal my money. He'd wanted to steal my freedom, my agency, my very identity. He'd been preparing to erase me as a legal person while profiting from my existence. But we're not going to let that happen. Eleanor said, her voice taking on the steel that had built a billion-dollar company. Jackson, please call Agent Martinez at the FBI Financial Crimes Unit. Tell her we have documentation of a major fraud case and need to meet tomorrow morning. As Jackson made the call, Eleanor turned back to me with an expression of fierce protectiveness I'd never seen from anyone in my life. Floyd, your father has spent 10 years trying to destroy you. But he made one critical mistake. He underestimated how much I love you, and he underestimated how far I'll go to protect my family. She reached across the table and took my hand, her grip strong and sure. We're going to get justice for your mother, recover every dollar he's stolen, and make sure he can never hurt you again. But more than that, we're going to reclaim your life and build the future you deserve. For the first time since my mother died, I felt like I had someone in my corner. Someone who saw me not as a burden or an obstacle, but as family worth fighting for. Christmas morning dawned clear and bright, the storm having passed during the night to leave the city sparkling under fresh snow. I woke up in Eleanor's guest room, which was larger and more luxurious than any apartment I'd ever lived in. Egyptian cotton sheets, a mattress that felt like sleeping on a cloud, and windows that offered breathtaking views of the city below. Eleanor had left fresh clothes for me, expensive jeans that fit perfectly, a cashmere sweater, softer than anything I'd ever owned, and leather boots that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Everything was exactly my size, which should have surprised me, but somehow didn't. Eleanor struck me as the type of person who made it her business to know important details. The smell of coffee and bacon drew me to the kitchen where I found Eleanor, directing Jackson, and a woman I didn't recognize in the preparation of what looked like a feast. The woman was tall and elegant with auburn hair and features that marked her as another member of my extended family. "Floyd," Eleanor called when she saw me. "Perfect timing. I'd like you to meet your Aunt Patricia." The woman turned from the stove where she'd been making pancakes, and her face lit up with a smile that was like looking into a mirror of my own expressions. She wiped her hands on a dish towel and crossed the room to embrace me with the easy affection of someone who'd known me my entire life. "My goodness, you look exactly like your mother," Patricia said, holding me at arm's length to study my features. "But you have the Hartwell chin, that stubborn line that runs in our family." Before I could respond, the elevator chimed again, and 3 more people emerged, a distinguished man in his 60s, who had to be Uncle William, and 2 younger people who looked like variations of myself. "Uncle Floyd." The young woman rushed forward, her enthusiasm infectious. "I'm Sarah, your cousin. I've been dying to meet you for years." Her brother Thomas was more reserved, but no less welcoming, shaking my hand with a grip that suggested strength and reliability. Sarah was tiny and energetic, bouncing on her toes as she peppered me with questions about my life and interests. "Sarah, let the man breathe," William said with gentle amusement. "We'll have plenty of time to catch up over breakfast." The dining room table had been expanded to accommodate our growing group, set with china that probably belonged in a museum, and crystal glasses that caught the morning light. As we passed around platters of food, the conversation flowed with the easy warmth of people who genuinely cared about each other. "Floyd, Sarah starts medical school next fall," Patricia said, serving him a stack of pancakes that smelled like vanilla and cinnamon. "She's hoping you might want to visit her campus sometime. Maybe see if California appeals to you." "I'd love to show you around UCLA," Sarah said eagerly. "The medical program is incredible, but they also have amazing business courses if you're thinking about corporate leadership." Thomas, who worked as an architect in Denver, was equally enthusiastic about family connections. "We have a standing invitation for you to visit Colorado anytime. I've got a cabin in Aspen that's perfect for skiing or just getting away from everything." The warmth and acceptance were overwhelming after years of feeling like an outsider in my own father's house. These people had been waiting to know me, eager to include me in their lives and traditions. Marcus had denied me this connection, this sense of belonging, for reasons that became clearer as Eleanor shared what she'd learned. "I called William and Patricia last night," Eleanor said, her expression growing serious. "I told them everything about Marcus's deception, the financial fraud, the lies he's been telling all of us." William's expression darkened. As a federal judge, he understood the legal implications better than anyone. "Eleanor, what Marcus has done isn't just morally reprehensible, it's a federal crime. Identity theft, wire fraud, mail fraud, tax evasion. He's looking at decades in prison if convicted." "Good," Patricia said with uncharacteristic vehemence. "What he did to Floyd, to all of us, is unforgivable. That boy has been alone for 10 years, when he should have been surrounded by family." Sarah reached across the table to squeeze my hand. "Floyd, I hope you know that we all thought about you constantly. Every family gathering felt incomplete without you there." The conversation was interrupted by Eleanor's phone ringing. She glanced at the caller ID, and her expression shifted to grim satisfaction. "Agent Martinez, thank you for calling back so quickly on Christmas morning." Eleanor's tone became businesslike as she spoke to the FBI agent. "Yes, we have extensive documentation. financial records, forged documents, evidence of a conspiracy spanning multiple years. As Eleanor arranged a meeting for later that morning, William pulled out his own phone and began making calls to contacts in the judicial system. Patricia was already researching mental health professionals who could evaluate and refute Marcus's claims about my supposed incompetence. "This is what family does," Thomas said quietly, watching his relatives mobilize on my behalf. "We protect each other. We fight for each other. You're not alone anymore, Floyd." The next few hours were a whirlwind of activity. Eleanor's penthouse became a command center as lawyers, accountants, and investigators arrived to examine the evidence against Marcus. Each new revelation deepened the scope of his crimes and strengthened the case against him. David Hoffman, Eleanor's primary attorney, spread documents across the dining room table like a general planning a military campaign. Bank statements, credit reports, forged signatures, and fraudulent applications painted a picture of systematic theft spanning years. The education fund alone represents over $180,000 in theft, Hoffman explained. But when you factor in the identity theft, the unauthorized credit accounts, and the wrongful death settlement he never disclosed, we're looking at well over $2 million in damages. Agent Martinez arrived with a team of forensic accountants who began photographing and cataloging evidence with meticulous precision. She was a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who spoke with the authority of someone accustomed to unraveling complex financial crimes. "Mr. Hartwell," she said, addressing me directly, "I need you to understand that your father's crimes go beyond simple theft. He's been operating what amounts to a sophisticated identity fraud operation, using your personal information to access credit and loans while systematically destroying your financial reputation." She showed me credit reports that made my stomach sick. Defaulted loans I'd never taken, maxed out credit cards I'd never applied for, collections accounts for debts I'd never incurred. Marcus had effectively stolen my financial identity and left me holding the responsibility for his crimes. "The good news is that we can prove these are fraudulent," Agent Martinez continued. "We have handwriting analysis, IP address tracking, and phone records that demonstrate you weren't involved in these transactions. But rebuilding your credit will take time even after your father is prosecuted." William, leveraging his connections in the federal court system, had already begun expediting the legal process. "I've spoken to Judge Henderson's office. Given the extensive documentation and the ongoing nature of the crimes, we can get emergency injunctions to freeze Marcus's assets and prevent further financial damage." As the morning progressed, the case against my father became overwhelming. Patricia's medical connections provided expert testimony about the psychological evaluations Marcus had used to support his incompetency claims. Thomas's business background helped unravel the shell corporations and false partnerships Marcus had created to hide stolen money. But perhaps most importantly, Eleanor's resources and determination ensured that every aspect of Marcus's deception would be thoroughly investigated and prosecuted. She'd built her business empire by paying attention to details and refusing to accept defeat, qualities that would serve us well in seeking justice. "Floyd," Eleanor said during a brief lull in the activity, "I want you to understand something important. This isn't just about getting your money back or seeing Marcus punished, though both of those things will happen." She gestured toward our relatives, still working tirelessly on my behalf despite the holiday. "This is about reclaiming your family, your heritage, your rightful place in the world. Marcus tried to steal your past and your future, but he couldn't steal who you really are." Sarah looked up from the documents she'd been organizing. "Floyd, when this is over, you're going to have choices you never imagined. College career opportunities, travel, relationships. You'll be able to build the life you actually want instead of just surviving." The weight of possibility was almost as overwhelming as the weight of betrayal had been. For 10 years, I'd lived within the narrow confines Marcus had constructed for me, believing I had limited options and even fewer resources. Now surrounded by family who genuinely cared about my welfare, I was beginning to glimpse a future filled with potential rather than constraints. "There's one more thing we need to discuss," Eleanor said, pulling out a thick legal document. Floyd, I'm formally naming you as my successor and primary heir effective immediately. If anything happens to me, you'll inherit the company and all my personal assets without any possibility of legal challenge. Eleanor, you don't have to, I began, but she cut me off with a wave of her hand. I absolutely do have to. Marcus has spent 10 years trying to steal your inheritance through fraud and manipulation. I'm going to make sure he can never touch what belongs to you, no matter what happens. Agent Martinez looked up from her evidence cataloging. Mrs. Hartwell, I should mention that we'll need Mr. Floyd to testify against his father when this case goes to trial. Are you prepared for that, sir? I thought about Marcus, sitting in his comfortable dining room celebrating Christmas, with money stolen from my mother's death, wearing her ring, living in luxury, funded by destroying my future. The fear I'd carried for 10 years, the desire to please him despite his cruelty, finally crystallized into something stronger. I'm ready to testify. I said, my voice steadier than I'd expected. It's time he faced the consequences of what he's done. Eleanor smiled with fierce pride. Then let's go get our justice. 2 days after Christmas, our convoy of vehicles pulled up to Marcus's house, like a small army preparing for battle. Eleanor rode with me in her limousine, while Agent Martinez followed in an FBI sedan with 2 other agents. David Hoffman arrived separately, with a team of attorneys and a court clerk, authorized to serve legal documents. The snow from Christmas Eve had melted and refrozen, leaving the sidewalks treacherous, and the yard scattered with dirty ice. Marcus's house looked smaller, somehow less imposing than it had seemed when I was locked outside freezing. The warm lights that had mocked my suffering now seemed harsh and artificial. Remember Floyd, Eleanor said as Jackson opened our door. We're here to reclaim what was stolen and ensure justice is served. Nothing more, nothing less. Agent Martinez approached us with a folder full of warrants and legal documents. We have authorization to search the premises, seize financial records, and place Mr. Marcus Hartwell under arrest for federal crimes. The local police are already in position to assist with the children if necessary. The children, Brady and Stella, would be traumatized by seeing their father arrested regardless of what he'd done to me. Despite everything, I felt a pang of sympathy for them. They were innocent victims of Marcus's crimes just like I'd been. Eleanor must have sensed my thoughts. Patricia is standing by to help with Brady and Stella if needed. She has experience with children in crisis situations, and she'll make sure they're properly cared for. We approached the front door in a formation that felt both official and deeply personal. This was the same door Marcus had slammed in my face 2 nights ago, the barrier between warmth and deadly cold that had nearly killed me. Now I was returning with the power to change everything. Eleanor rang the doorbell with the calm confidence of someone accustomed to command. After a moment, we heard footsteps and the rattle of locks being disengaged. The door opened to reveal Janet still in her bathrobe at 11 in the morning, her face shifting from annoyance to confusion to outright terror as she took in our group. "What's going on?" she demanded, her voice shrill. "Marcus, there are people here." Marcus appeared behind her, and the color drained from his face when he saw Eleanor. For several seconds he stood frozen in shock, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. "Hello, Marcus," Eleanor said, her tone conversational but cold. "I think we need to have a talk about Floyd." "Mom," Marcus stammered. "I thought. We heard. How are you here?" "I'm here because I discovered you've been lying to me for 3 years," Eleanor replied calmly. "Among other things." "May we come in?" Marcus stepped back involuntarily, his legal instincts warning him that cooperation was his only option when faced with this show of force. Agent Martinez identified herself and displayed her credentials, which caused Janet to take several steps backward and call for Brady and Stella. The living room I entered was exactly as I remembered: expensive furniture paid for with stolen money. Family photos that included everyone except me. Christmas decorations that sparkled with false cheer. Brady and Stella appeared from the kitchen, still in their pajamas, confused by the sudden invasion of official-looking strangers. Agent Martinez, FBI Financial Crimes Unit. The agent announced, addressing Marcus directly. We have warrants to search these premises and seize materials related to an ongoing investigation into identity theft fraud and embezzlement. Marcus's face went from pale to gray. I want to call my lawyer. You have that right, Agent Martinez agreed. But first, we need to discuss your son Floyd and the crimes you've committed against him. Janet was backing toward the stairs, trying to shield Brady and Stella from what was happening. This is ridiculous. We haven't done anything wrong. Floyd is just bitter because we don't enable his neediness. Eleanor's expression sharpened dangerously. Mrs. Hartwell, I suggest you remain silent unless you want to add obstruction of justice to the charges you're already facing. Charges? Janet's voice cracked. What charges? Agent Martinez opened her folder and began reading from an arrest warrant. Marcus Hartwell, you're under arrest for identity theft, wire fraud, mail fraud, tax evasion, and conspiracy to commit financial crimes. Janet Hartwell, you're under arrest as an accessory to these crimes and for conspiracy to defraud. The next few minutes were chaos. Brady and Stella began crying as they realized their parents were being arrested. Janet screamed about police brutality and demanded to know what they'd supposedly done wrong. Marcus tried to claim the whole thing was a misunderstanding, that he could explain everything. But I was focused on something else entirely. Through the confusion and shouting, I walked to the mantelpiece, where family photos were displayed. There, in a silver frame, was a picture of Janet, wearing my mother's wedding ring, at some family celebration I hadn't attended. Agent Martinez, I said quietly, pointing to the photograph. That ring belongs to my deceased mother. It was part of her estate and should have been passed down to me. Eleanor came to stand beside me, her expression becoming even more dangerous as she recognized the ring she'd helped my father choose 30 years ago. Janet, remove that ring immediately and give it to Floyd. I will not, Janet snapped, instinctively covering her hand. This is my ring. Marcus gave it to me when we got engaged. Marcus, Eleanor said, her voice deadly quiet. Did you give Catherine's wedding ring to this woman? My father had the grace to look ashamed, but he was too trapped to admit the truth. It was just sitting in a box. Catherine was dead, and Janet was going to be my wife. You thought you could erase my mother and replace her with a woman who throws food at her son? I interrupted, finally finding my voice. The anger that had been building for 2 days crystallized into something pure and powerful. You thought you could steal everything that mattered to me, and I'd just accept it because I was too weak to fight back. I stepped forward, facing the man who had terrorized and controlled me for 10 years. But I'm not weak anymore, Marcus. I'm not alone, and I'm not afraid of you. Agent Martinez nodded to her team, who began placing Marcus and Janet in handcuffs. Mr. Hartwell, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. As the agents recited the Miranda warnings, Eleanor knelt down to speak with Brady and Stella, her voice gentle despite the circumstances. Children, your parents have made some serious mistakes that affect Floyd's life and well-being. You're going to stay with your Aunt Patricia for a while until everything gets sorted out. Patricia had arrived quietly during the arrests, bringing child psychologists and social workers to help Brady and Stella process what was happening. The children were confused and frightened, but Patricia's medical training and natural compassion quickly put them at ease. Floyd, Stella said tearfully, are Mommy and Daddy going to jail? I looked down at my half-sister, seeing her fear and confusion, and felt a complicated mixture of justice and sympathy. They made choices that hurt people, including me. But you and Brady didn't do anything wrong, and you're going to be taken care of. Brady, despite being younger, seemed to understand more about the situation. Floyd, I'm sorry Daddy was mean to you. I didn't know he was stealing your money. It's not your fault, buddy, I told him honestly. None of this is your fault. As Marcus and Janet were led away in handcuffs, Marcus turned back one last time, his expression shifting from defiance to desperation, to something that might have been genuine remorse. "Floyd, I'm sorry," he said, his voice breaking. "I know I messed up everything. I know I hurt you. But I never meant for it to go this far." I looked at my father, seeing him clearly, for perhaps the first time in my life. He wasn't the powerful, intimidating figure who had controlled my world through fear and manipulation. He was just a weak man who had chosen greed and selfishness over love and family. "Marcus," I said, using his name instead of Dad for the first time, "you had 10 years to apologize. You had 10 years to tell the truth, to include me in this family, to honor my mother's memory. Instead, you stole my inheritance, destroyed my credit, isolated me from my relatives, and tried to have me declared incompetent, so you could steal even more." I took a breath, feeling the weight of his choices and mine. "I forgive you, because carrying anger will only hurt me more. But forgiveness doesn't mean avoiding consequences. You're going to prison for what you've done, and I'm going to build the life you tried to steal from me." As the police cars pulled away, with Marcus and Janet, Eleanor put her arm around my shoulders. The house felt different now, smaller and sadder. No longer the fortress of warmth and belonging it had seemed when I was locked outside. "Patricia will make sure Brady and Stella get the therapy and support they need," Eleanor said. "They'll understand eventually that what happened today was about justice, not revenge." Agent Martinez approached us with a key ring she'd taken from Marcus during his arrest. "Mr. Floyd, your father had these keys to a storage unit, where we found additional evidence of his crimes. There are also boxes of your mother's belongings that he apparently kept hidden from you." My mother's belongings. 10 years after her death, I would finally be able to reclaim the memories Marcus had stolen, along with everything else. David Hoffman appeared with a thick folder of legal documents. "The court has frozen all of Marcus's assets pending restitution proceedings. His house cars, bank accounts, everything will be liquidated to repay the money he stole from you and your grandmother." As we prepared to leave, I took one last look at the house where I'd spent so many miserable Christmas dinners, where I'd been made to feel like an unwelcome burden while my father profited from my mother's death. "Eleanor," I said, making a decision that felt both generous and empowering, "I want to set aside money from the restitution to establish college funds for Brady and Stella. They shouldn't be punished for their father's crimes." Eleanor smiled with genuine pride. "That's exactly the kind of decision your mother would have made. She always believed in protecting children, even when adults failed them." As we drove away from Marcus's house for the last time, I felt something I hadn't experienced since my mother died. The sense that justice was possible, that family could be a source of strength rather than pain, and that the future was something to build, rather than simply endure. 6 months later, I stood in the boardroom of Hartwell Medical Technologies, looking out at the city that had once seemed so distant and unattainable. The view from the 40th floor was breathtaking, but what took my breath away was the realization that this was my company, now my responsibility and my legacy. Eleanor sat at the head of the conference table, her silver hair catching the afternoon light as she addressed our board of directors. At 78, she was still sharp as a blade, but she'd begun transferring operational control to me, with the confidence of someone who'd chosen her successor carefully. "The quarterly numbers are excellent," she announced to the assembled executives, all of whom had become mentors and allies over the past months. "Our new emergency cardiac monitors have exceeded all sales projections, and our international expansion is ahead of schedule." I'd started college again, this time studying business management and medical technology at a pace that worked with my increasing responsibilities at the company. Sarah had been right about UCLA's programs, but I'd chosen to stay local and take evening classes while learning the business from the ground up. The education was everything Marcus had claimed to give me, but had actually stolen. Real professors, genuine challenges, the satisfaction of earning grades through effort rather than lies. My transcript was mine this time, built with my own work and achievements. "Floyd," Eleanor said, turning to me with that proud smile I'd grown to treasure, Would you like to update the board on the Foundation's progress? The Hartwell Foundation for Foster Youth had become my passion project, a program designed to help young adults aging out of the foster care system. We provided education funding, mentorship programs, and job training, all based on my own experience of being isolated and denied opportunities. We've awarded scholarships to 230 students this year, I reported to the board. Our mentorship program has matched successful professionals with young people who need guidance, and our job placement rate is at 87%. The foundation was funded partly by the restitution money recovered from Marcus's crimes, but mostly by the profits from Eleanor's company. It felt right to transform the pain of my experience into opportunities for others who'd faced similar challenges. Marcus had been sentenced to 12 years in federal prison for his crimes. Janet received 5 years as an accessory, though she was eligible for parole in 3. They'd both lost their appeals, and the evidence against them had been overwhelming. Justice had been served, though it could never undo the damage they'd caused. Brady and Stella were thriving in Patricia's care. The therapy had helped them understand that their father's crimes weren't their fault, and that the family dynamics they'd grown up with weren't normal or healthy. They visited me sometimes, and we were slowly building a relationship based on honesty rather than manipulation. They ask about you constantly, Patricia had told me during our last family dinner. Brady wants to know if you'll teach him about business when he's older, and Stella has been drawing pictures of your mother based on the photographs you showed her. The photographs Agent Martinez had recovered from Marcus's storage unit had revealed treasures I'd thought lost forever. My mother's jewelry, her artwork journals she'd kept that chronicled my childhood with loving detail. Marcus had hidden them away, like dirty secrets. But now they graced my apartment and Eleanor's penthouse, keeping Catherine's memory alive where it belonged. I'd visited my mother's grave for the first time since her funeral, bringing flowers and spending hours telling her about everything that had happened. Eleanor had come with me, sharing stories about my mother that Marcus had never told me, painting a picture of a woman who'd been beloved by everyone who knew her. Your mother would be so proud of the man you've become, Eleanor had said that day, her hand resting on Catherine's headstone. She always said you had her kindness, but your grandfather's strength. She was right. The extended family Marcus had hidden from me had embraced me completely. Uncle William had officiated when I'd legally changed my name to Floyd Hartwell, reclaiming my identity and heritage. Sarah had become more like a sister than a cousin, visiting regularly and including me in every family event. Thomas had been my best man when I'd married Jessica, a pediatric nurse I'd met through Patricia's hospital. Jessica understood trauma and healing, having worked with children in crisis for years. She'd helped me process my own experiences while building something new and healthy together. Floyd, Eleanor said after the board meeting had concluded, "Walk with me to the executive floor. There's something I want to show you." The executive floor housed Eleanor's personal office, a space I'd been visiting more frequently as she prepared me to take full control of the company. But today, she led me to a different room, one I'd never entered before. "This was your grandfather's office," she explained, opening the door to reveal a space that took my breath away. The walls were lined with medical patents bearing the Hartwell name, photographs of hospitals using our equipment to save lives, letters from grateful patients and families. He started this company because he believed medical technology should serve humanity, not just profit. Eleanor continued, "Every device we create, every innovation we fund, every job we provide is part of that mission." She handed me a key, ornate and old-fashioned, clearly significant, in ways that went beyond mere access. "This is yours now, Floyd. Not just the office, but everything it represents. The responsibility to use our resources wisely to protect our employees' welfare, to ensure our company serves a purpose larger than ourselves." I accepted the key with hands that trembled slightly. 6 months ago, I'd been a warehouse worker, living paycheck to paycheck, believing I had no family and no future. Now I was the heir to a medical technology empire, surrounded by relatives who loved me, married to a woman who understood me completely. Eleanor, I said, "I have an idea for expanding the foundation." She smiled encouragingly. "Tell me." "I want to create a program specifically for adult children who've been financially abused by their parents. Legal aid psychological counseling help rebuilding credit and establishing independence. There are more people like me out there trapped by family members who use love as a weapon." Eleanor's eyes brightened with pride and excitement. "That's brilliant, Floyd. And it's exactly the kind of innovative thinking this company needs as we move forward." As we discussed the details of the new program, I felt the profound satisfaction of turning personal pain into purposeful action. Marcus had tried to destroy me, but his betrayal had ultimately led me to discover my true family, my real heritage, and my authentic self. The program we developed over the following months would help hundreds of people escape similar situations. We provided legal representation, financial counseling, family therapy, and job training, all designed to help victims of financial abuse reclaim their independence and dignity. During the launch event, I spoke to an audience filled with survivors, advocates, and professionals who'd dedicated their careers to helping others heal from family trauma. 6 months ago, I was locked outside my father's house in life-threatening cold because I mentioned my deceased mother during Christmas dinner. I began, my voice carrying clearly through the auditorium. I thought I was alone in the world, that I had no family and no future. I paused, looking out at the faces in the audience, seeing recognition and hope in their expressions. But the worst betrayal of my life became the doorway to discovering who I really was and what I was capable of becoming. The people who hurt me most were ultimately responsible for connecting me with the family that had been waiting to love me. The applause was warm and sustained, but what mattered more were the individuals who approached me afterward, sharing their own stories of family abuse and expressing gratitude for programs that might help them heal. Sometimes, I continued in my closing remarks, the people who hurt us most are actually testing our strength without realizing it. Our response to betrayal defines who we become, more than the betrayal itself. That evening, as Jessica and I sat in our apartment, looking through wedding photos and planning our first anniversary celebration, I reflected on how completely my life had transformed. The studio apartment with the broken heater had been replaced by a spacious home filled with love and laughter. The isolation and fear had been replaced by family connections and purposeful work. "What are you thinking about?" Jessica asked, curling up beside me on the sofa we'd chosen together. "Just how different everything is from last Christmas," I replied, pulling her closer. "How close I came to giving up, and how much I would have missed if I had." "Your grandmother always says you have your mother's resilience," Jessica said softly. "She's right, you know. Not everyone could have survived what you went through, and still chosen to help others instead of seeking revenge." The foundation programs were thriving, the company was growing, and Brady and Stella had become regular visitors to our home. They were healing from their trauma with the support of therapy and honest family relationships, learning what healthy love looked like. Eleanor had officially retired 6 months after my wedding, though she remained as board chairman and chief advisor. The transition had been seamless, largely because she'd spent years preparing me for the responsibility through careful mentoring and gradual empowerment. "The company is in good hands," she'd announced during her retirement party. "Floyd has his grandfather's vision, his mother's compassion, and his own unique understanding of what it means to overcome adversity. I couldn't have asked for a better successor." On the first anniversary of that terrible Christmas Eve, I drove to the cemetery where my mother was buried. Her headstone was now surrounded by flowers from family members who'd never stopped loving her memory, even when they were prevented from expressing it. "Hi, Mom," I said, settling beside her grave with a thermos of hot chocolate and a photo album full of pictures from the past year. "I have so much to tell you." I shared everything: the wedding she would have loved, the business success she would have been proud of, the foundation work that honored her belief in helping others. I told her about Eleanor's health scare that had reminded us all how precious time was, and about Brady and Stella's progress in therapy. "I think you would have liked Jessica," I said. showing my mother's headstone a photo of my wife volunteering at the Children's Hospital. She has your kindness, and she understands why the foundation matters so much to me. As I prepared to leave, I noticed someone approaching through the cemetery paths. It was Brady, now 11 and growing tall, carrying a small bouquet of flowers that he placed carefully beside my mother's headstone. "Hi, Floyd," he said, settling beside me in the grass. "Aunt Patricia said it would be okay if I came to visit Catherine today. I wanted to thank her." "Thank her?" Brady nodded solemnly. "Aunt Patricia says that when people die, sometimes they watch over their families and help good things happen. She says maybe Catherine was watching over you that Christmas Eve, making sure Eleanor would find you." I looked at my half-brother, struck by his maturity and insight. The therapy had helped him process his father's crimes, but it had also helped him understand the difference between real love and manipulative control. "I think she would have loved you," I told Brady honestly. "And I think she would be proud of how you're growing up, despite everything that happened." Brady smiled, the expression transforming his face from serious to genuinely happy. "Floyd, when I'm older, will you really teach me about business? I want to help people like the foundation does." "Absolutely," I promised. "But only if you promise to always choose helping people over making money even when it's harder." "I promise," Brady said solemnly. "Just like you and Eleanor do." As we walked back to the cars together, Brady chattering about his school projects and his plans for the future, I felt the profound contentment that comes from surviving betrayal and choosing love over revenge. The lesson I'd learned that terrible Christmas Eve had nothing to do with accepting abuse or forgiving without consequences. Instead, it was about recognizing that our response to betrayal reveals who we really are, and that sometimes the worst experiences of our lives become the foundation for our greatest achievements. Marcus had tried to destroy me through isolation, financial abuse, and emotional manipulation. But his betrayal had ultimately connected me with my real family, my true heritage, and my authentic purpose. The pain he'd caused had been transformed into programs that helped others heal businesses that served humanity and relationships built on honesty rather than control. Standing in the cemetery where my mother rested, surrounded by family who chose to love rather than manipulate, I understood that justice isn't just about punishment. Sometimes justice is about taking the power that was stolen from you and using it to build something better than what was destroyed. The Christmas Eve that had nearly killed me had actually saved my life, connecting me with the love and purpose I'd been searching for my entire life. And that transformation, from victim to victor, from isolation to belonging, from despair to hope, was the greatest gift I could have received. What moments of betrayal or hardship in your own life might actually be doorways to discovering your true strength and purpose? Have you ever found that the people who hurt you most ended up revealing who really loves you? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like this video and share it with someone who might need to hear that they're stronger than they realize. Subscribe for more stories about overcoming family trauma and finding your authentic self. And remember that sometimes the worst Christmas Eve of your life might actually be preparing you for the best year that's yet to come. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope you'll join me in believing that love always wins, even when it takes longer than we hoped it would.